Good evening, everyone. I'm Robin Metcalf, and it is my privilege to be your host for the 605th episode of York Universe, the astronomy and astrophysics program written and presented by the students, faculty, alumni, and friends of York University. This podcast is being broadcast live from the Allan Carswell Observatory located at York University in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. York Universe broadcasts every Monday night at 9 p.m. Toronto time. And this podcast, as well as past episodes, are available wherever podcasts are distributed. The York Universe production works in concert with our online public viewing program run by York's amazing observatory team. So throughout this broadcast, what you'll see on our YouTube channel is images taken with the telescopes at the observatory, including when the sky is clear and we can open the dome, the live view through our 1-meter telescope, which is the largest telescope at a Canadian university. Throughout the broadcast, if you have any questions about what you see or hear, you can chat live with the observatory team by going to www.yorku.ca/science/observatory and then follow the links to online public viewing, or OPV. Or outside of the show, if you have any questions or comments about our past shows, or if you'd like to request that we cover a topic you're interested in, please send us an email at observe@yorku.ca. You can also connect with us on Instagram and X with the handle YorkU Observatory, and on Facebook at Allan I. Carswell Observatory. And be sure to check out our website for observatory events, previous shows, and contact information. Again, our website can be found at www.yorku.ca/science/observatory. For those of you who don't know me, I'm an astronomy prof at York University, and currently I have the honor of serving as the director of York's awesome Division of Natural Science, fondly known as NATS. And this is the division at York which offers a very large range of fascinating courses for non-science students at York to meet their science breadth requirement. NATS courses are taught by a ridiculously talented team of science communicators, two of whom are our guests this evening. And I am so looking forward to our chat because I know it's going to take us all over the place. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. John Moores and Dr. Jessie Rogerson, who are both colleagues of mine at York. Dr. Moores is a planetary scientist and a prof in the Department of Earth and Space Science and Engineering at the Lausanne School of Engineering at York University. And Dr. Rogerson is an astronomer and a prof in York's Division of Natural Science, as well as a frequent podcast bomber here on York Universe. We are also joined by Michelle Parsons. Michelle is a watercolor science illustrator and bird artist. And that brings me to the reason why all three of these amazing people have been brought together on this show. And that is because they have recently published a truly wonderful and important book called Daydreaming in the Solar System, Surfing Saturn's Rings, Golfing on the Moon, and Other Adventures in Space Exploration. A very, very warm welcome to John, Jessie, and Michelle. Would you all like to say hello?
Hello.
Hello there. Thanks for having us, Robin.
My pleasure. Great. I have so many questions for you all about this awesome collaboration of yours. But before we get into that, for those of you out there who are longtime listeners of York Universe, you will know that we always begin the show with This Week in Space History. As it happens, by a fun little coincidence, today is the birthday of an astronomer who is among the most famous of the solar system daydreamers of the 17th century, and that is Christian Huygens. Huygens was a Dutch scientist born in 1629, about 20 years after the Italian astronomer Galileo had published the first telescope observations of the sky in his book, Starry Messenger, which was published in 1610. And in the year leading up to that book, Galileo made a shocking observation about the planet Saturn, which he described in a letter like this: "The star of Saturn is not a single star, but is a composite of three, which almost touch each other, never change or move relative to each other and are arranged in a row along the zodiac, the middle one being 3 times larger than the lateral ones. So, in other words, he saw that Saturn appeared to have two protruding bumps on either side. And he later described that in his book as ears or lobes. And he illustrated this as a sort of double-handed spoutless teapot. And having just recently discovered that planet Jupiter has moons in orbit around it, it made sense to assume that the bumps on either side of Saturn were moons as well, that Saturn was triple bodied. However, in the decade following Galileo's book, he continued to track these two Saturnian satellites, expecting them to demonstrate an orbital cycle, but they stubbornly refused to behave the way moons are supposed to behave. And instead of appearing and disappearing as they passed in front of and behind Saturn at regular intervals, they remained stuck to the planet, always on either side. And even stranger, they both disappeared for a while at the same time, and then they both reappeared at the same time, which two moons in a similar orbit really shouldn't do. Over the next few decades, Saturn continued to be studied by other astronomers through telescopes of varying and improving quality, and alternative theories about those ears were proposed. But it was Christian Huygens in 1656 who finally interpreted Saturn's strange appearance correctly. Huygens had made significant advancements in the refracting telescope, and by the 1650s, he had crafted a telescope with a magnification of around 50 times, which was nearly double the magnification of Galileo's best telescope. And with that telescope, Huygens announced in 1656 that he had discovered a satellite of Saturn. This is the moon we now know of as Titan, though Huygens gave it the initial title Luna Saturni. But in that same publication, Huygens included a mysterious anagram, a string of letters which stood for something to be revealed later. And this was a method that scientists occasionally used. It had been initiated by Galileo to claim ownership of a discovery before officially publishing it in detail. Huygens made his readers wait 3 years before he revealed the meaning of his anagram, which he did in a lengthy book about Saturn published in 1659, in which he correctly described Saturn's ears as a thin, flat ring, nowhere touching and inclined to the ecliptic. And he then went on to correctly explain that the regular disappearance of the rings, which had so befuddled the other astronomers, that occurs because the inclination or tilt of Saturn's rings relative to our perspective on Earth, it changes as both we and Saturn orbit the sun, and that causes the appearance of the rings to follow a roughly 15-year cycle in which they are seen at different angles. So they appear nice and bright when seen face on and barely visible when seen edge on, which is how they are appearing to us right now in April 2025. So if you believe in the eternal soul, then tonight, not only is Huygens blowing out candles somewhere, but Galileo is shaking his fist at ringless Saturn. How's that story?
Robin, you are amazing. That was just wonderful to listen to.
Okay. All right, let's turn to the real storytellers in the room, John, Jesse, and Michelle. I have a pile of fun questions for you. I know we're not going to get to them all, but we'll just try our best. And I'm going to start things off by briefly describing my experience when I first opened your book, and then I'm going to turn things over to you. Okay. So full disclosure, when Jesse told me that he and John were writing this book together, I absolutely confess that based on my interactions with both of you, my expectation was that the book was going to have a really science nerdy voice to it, because you're both science nerds, right? Like you're rock star science nerds for sure, but you got to own it. However, when I started reading the book, I was shocked to find it is beautifully written. And I say this as someone who is an avid reader of both fiction and nonfiction. The style of writing in the book, it is so engaging and it's so viscerally descriptive in the way that you really immerse us in the worlds of our solar system. And also, there's some really moving and thoughtful sentiments and powerful messages about the ethics of space exploration and how we can be interplanetary space travelers in sustainable ways. So I have some specific questions about both of those observations. We'll get to that later in the podcast. For now, I just wanted to also comment on how quickly the reader is drawn into the book, no matter what the reader's background is. On page 1 of the preface, you take us to a volcano on one of Jupiter's moons, and you describe in incredible detail how we would experience it. You masterfully embed little bits and pieces of the science into the descriptions in a totally seamless way. It's like hiding the vegetables in the dessert, like carrot cake. It's that good. And I honestly think that anyone, no matter what their background knowledge of the solar system, would just be easily drawn into this and want more. Okay, that is more than enough for me for now. Can we please start our chat by having one of you describe the unique format of this book in the chapter structure?
Well, we decided that what we wanted to do here was to combine together science fiction, and we wanted to combine that with what we were actually knew about the solar system from 60 some odd years of exploring it. And we thought, what a better way to do this than to start with a story that walks through the environment that we want to describe from a human perspective, and then to follow that up for people who wanted to dig a little bit deeper into the science that actually enabled that to happen.
Right, exactly. It's so well done. Like that's the hook. Every chapter begins with this sort of daydream and then gets deeper into the science.
The
Sorry, Jesse, go ahead.
Yeah, if I can just what you're talking about, this whole like this visceral the feelings of being in these places. We John is an incredible writer.
Yes.
The heart and soul of what you're talking about is John. So when we started putting this together, I was working at the museum at the time, Robin, and I was writing a blog post about Enceladus with the plumes, the shooting plumes up out of the moon and make the E-ring around Saturn, and these like moon-sized plumes. And I thought that I was like, oh, this would be really fun to figure out if you jumped into these plumes, if you're walking around on the moon of these plume with the moon of Enceladus, would you be lifted up
Hmm.
by these plumes?
Cool.
And so I was trying to I'm a quasar scientist. I'm not a planetary scientist. And I tried to read some papers and whatever. And I emailed John this question, and John came
Hmm.
back with like this big long response with all these great calculations and showed me, no, you can't, you would fall down. But then in a great science communicator way, John said, but if you made a big parachute and you caught enough of the plume, then you would float off into space.
Right.
And that right there was like, holy crap, John, we've got something, this is really interesting. And so I wrote that blog post. It's on the museum website still. And then so when I wanted to get going on a book with John, I was envisioning more of that, where we were doing calculations about um, interesting
Right.
places and stuff. But then John, I don't remember how it happened, John, but we were talking and talking and talking, and it got morphed into this meditative walk through the places and actually getting people to sit in the place. And
Right.
I think John's influence there made it happen. It wouldn't have happened with me on my own, that's for sure. And the way John wrote most of the stories is just, I agree. You get sucked right into them.
That is an amazing magical team effort that you just described. And it's so funny because I could totally see John like doing his day job and I don't know, grants, TA assignments, whatever, and he gets this email from you about parachuting and just dropping it all. Like I would so much rather think about this right now.
Is
Well,
that
that's
what
right.
happened, John?
Well, I mean, this is what's fun for us as scientists, right?
Sure, of course.
So that I think is what draws it out. And I think that it helped that Jesse and I, we've been friends forever, or, as long as you define 2007 as forever. But we come from, little bit different background too. So because of that, because Jesse is has this astronomy lens and I have this planetary science lens, I've been sort of living and breathing this type of, imagining environments for my entire career. So it was easy for me to jump into the stories. But
Hmm.
Jesse was coming at this from the perspective of somebody who was learning something new. And so I think that made the science that he wrote about, like what was the thing to pay attention to? I think it made it
Right.
sharper. And so you have this dialogue between the two halves of the chapters that I think is just really magical.
Oh, that's so interesting. I have a question coming up, that gets into collaborative moments in more detail. But this is great background. But just to give our listeners a little bit of a trailer of some of the very cool daydreaming scenarios that you create for us. So there's chapters on rappelling in a Martian canyon, surfing Saturn's rings, sailing the Titanian Sea, gardening on Bennu, skydiving in Jupiter's atmosphere, spelunking on Hyperion, and tobogganing on Pluto. I love that. I suspect, though, that your original list of adventures was longer than that. You had to do some culling. And I'd love to know, were there other scenarios that you played around with that, and why didn't they make the cut? Like, that must have been hard.
So John, I went and found the list.
Hmm.
How long was it?
It's not actually as long because it got cut up because we had this list that we put together and then it got morphed into what became the final copy. So the ones that got culled, it's not actually that long. Maybe there's like 18 here, 20.
Okay.
Um,
Any one in particular that you were just like heartbroken to not include? Or you feel pretty good about your final list?
I don't know about you, John and Michelle, but I feel pretty good about the final list.
I
There's
guess you
nothing
weren't
that's really,
limited. You could have gone as long as you wanted to.
Actually,
yeah.
that's not how it works with publishing.
No.
Yeah, we had at the start of the process, here's the number of words you will deliver. So
Really? Okay.
if we wanted more chapters, then we would have to make the chapters shorter. And
Mm,
so, we sort of took the most promising ideas forward, and we don't feel, I don't think, quite so sad about the ones that didn't get developed because they didn't really advance. There was something missing about them in
Mhm.
order to sort of move them ahead. I mean, I can come up with things other places that I'd love to go, but we hadn't necessarily decided what we wanted to do there, or the thing to do there that was obvious was the same as another place.
right, right. To
Some of
make
them, I
Yeah,
mean,
each
so
each
yeah.
experience very, very distinct so that you're
Hmm.
learning something new with each one.
one here that I was looking at the list. I originally wanted to put Enceladus into it because that was the original blog post that I
Mm,
wrote, right? And then I was like,
hmm.
and we talked about it. I'm like, oh, maybe that's too close to what's the blog post that got made. But in our notes here, we have so for everybody listening, if you haven't read the book, the chapter each chapter, 15 chapters. The first half of the chapter is a daydream. But basically, it's a story where you're the main character and you are experiencing some activity in a place in the solar system. And then the second half of the chapter is more like us talking to you about the science we learned and how that informed the story. And there's the so we had like a list of locations and then a list of possible activities in those locations. And for Enceladus, we have Robin skating.
Ah, okay. So
We'll talk about that later.
okay.
Now
Actually, my
here's
next question, but okay.
on this list here. I don't know if you remember this one, John. Is Miranda, the moon Miranda,
Oh, yes.
Mm.
base jumping off of Verona Rupis? I don't know how to pronounce that.
That's right. Yeah,
That would have been a cool one to have.
it sticks in my brain, and there is a wonderful YouTuber who does simulations of other places in the solar system, and that person has a simulation of jumping off of this particular feature on Miranda. So
Interesting.
yeah, we didn't see that until after we had delivered the book,
Hmm.
but that would have been fun too.
Hmm.
Something I just love about this, by the way, for those out there who are thinking about science fiction and thinking about those parallels, is I think about the stories that we wrote as going and visiting a national park, but just a national park on another planet, a moon, an asteroid, something like that.
Hmm.
So the thing that differentiates it, I think, from most science fiction is in most science fiction, you're seeing these wonderful vistas, but really you're occupied with trying not to die.
Right.
And we take out that trying not to die bit so that you can enjoy what you're seeing.
I love
That's a really
that.
good way of saying it, John. I never thought
Yeah.
about it that way.
Okay. So, I thought it would be neat if we were to create a little solar system daydream here ourselves so that our listeners get a sense of this magic that you guys create. And the scenario I have in mind, it was actually inspired by my kids, as the best daydreams tend to be. So let me first give you a little background about where this came from. I have two sons. They're very close in age. And when they were little, they were very, very physically active, like wrestling with each other and with their parents. That was just their favorite thing to do ever. And so there were often bumps and bruises that were issued. And whenever there was any incident involving contact with the head, I would check for signs of concussion by asking them questions about the planets. Now, of course, if there was ever a serious head injury, of course I will call 911. Fortunately, that only ever happened once. So for any listeners that have like the phone number to Children's Services half typed into their phone right now, please don't worry. I didn't actually rely on this method to diagnose brain injury. However, one time, my younger son Joey, he had bumped his head, and so I asked him, which is the hottest planet? And his answer was Pluto. And not because he was concussed, but more likely, like he was five, I think. Like that might have been the only planet he remembered at the time. So I said, no, Joey, remember Pluto is so far from the sun that it's frozen all over all the time. And Joey thought about that for a moment, and then he busted out with, well, if we're gonna go to Pluto, we'd better bring our skates. And like he says it like totally
Oh,
seriously, like this
that's
is, a very practical thought. And okay, now Joey is now a 19-year-old 5'2" goalie, and all of us in our family play ice hockey with varying degrees of talent, myself at the far lower end of the scale. And so I'm wondering if I were to enter into a hockey tournament on Pluto, what would that be like? And is there any chance that the Plutonian conditions would improve my hockey skills?
first of all, that this is like the dream question. Like when you talk about your book and you talk about space and you try to engage people with things, someone coming up with this kind of question is exactly what you're looking for. So thank you
Okay,
for
good.
this question. But even though I'm talking first, I really feel like I need to defer to John. I am an astronomer. I look at
You
quasars
do
through
play hockey.
telescopes, but I do play hockey, and I think I'll defer to John, and
Okay.
maybe I can guess, because I feel like John would actually know the answer, and I can guess
Okay.
the answer. And my guess would be, of course, there's snow and ice there, but the questions, if we're playing as if we were writing this book and John and I were trying to do this, I would be sitting in
Uh-huh.
John's office right now and I'd be like, okay, well, how hard is the ice? Okay, well, how much ice is there? What is the ice made of? John, what is the coefficient of friction? And I know how to calculate that, but are we bringing metal skates? Are there other kinds of skates that we can bring?
Well,
Anyway, these would be the
that's such
questions.
a, I didn't even think about that. That the like frictionless surface, of different degrees of it, depending on the composition of the ice. Okay, anyway, John, what have you got?
Well, I think we may need some magic skates, or there's a few places in the book where, we actually, the science is close, so we have to, bring in some futuristic technology that fortunately the main character doesn't actually know anything about. So
Okay.
in terms of the of how Pluto's set up, your ice that's closest to melting, and you want ice that's close to melting because you want to glide along on a little bit of liquid if you can, is going to be the nitrogen ice. So this is the ice that we see in the left-hand side of the heart of Pluto.
Mm-hmm.
So the warmest it gets there is something like 55 Kelvin. So that's quite cold.
Mm-hmm.
That would be what? About 220 degrees below zero centigrade and
Mhm.
a lot Fahrenheit. So what we do with skates normally is it's the pressure that you apply from the skates that
Mm-hmm.
actually melts the ice underneath a little bit. So for for nitrogen, we've got to get up to 77K. So we need to get 22K somewhere. But there's a problem. I mean, that's not a crazy amount. I mean, it's hard to skate when it's 20 below zero on a natural ice lake, but it's possible. But the problem that we've got is that the gravity on Pluto is really, really tiny.
Hmm.
Gravity on the Earth is like 9.81 meters per second squared. Pluto's like zero point 0.6. So it's
Hmm.
hard to apply that kind of pressure to the surface. But if you go ahead and maybe you heat the blades of your skates,
Uh-huh.
maybe that'll give you the glide that you need.
Interesting. Interesting. So,
That is
y
so cool, by the
yeah, yeah.
way.
Um, yeah, so it's just so neat to think of the two of
So
you
then
in
my
your office
question,
throwing these things around.
and then
Yeah, go
here's what
ahead.
I would come back, right? So John would be saying these things, and then if it was me sitting there, I'd be like, okay, but one of the more important things about skating is not that the ice is ice and that there's pressure is pressure. Those are like the most important things, I guess. But a secondary thing is flatness, right, and smoothness. And
Okay.
you can have like you can go out to a glacier here on Earth and like it's just choppy and bumpy and rough and tumble and like there's no way you're skating on that, right? Like so you need flat ice. That's why we flood the ice when you play
Yeah,
hockey, right?
presumably we're going to have a Plutonian Zamboni.
So
I
we
mean,
have
this is
a
a tournament.
so how would that would have been where my brain was going next is how are we actually flattening this ice and is there anything like pond hockey on like with pond hockey here on Earth you could go out and shovel a pond and do a little bit of skating on it.
Hmm.
The heart of Pluto is this sort of it's like a big glacier that's slowly moving. It's almost bubbling, right, John? It's bubbling over millions of years, kind of, or thousands of years. I can't remember.
Yeah,
So
really
like,
slowly and very pitted because of that.
Right,
so
right.
then we're not looking at any flat surfaces naturally, right?
No, no, and you've got
Yeah.
those water ice dunes as well, because water ice on Pluto is like concrete.
Mm.
Oh yes. Mm.
But if you had a deep enough drill, you get all the way down to, there might be a little bit of molten nitrogen way down below and bring that up. Then maybe you could flood it. But, maybe we just need to turn the heat up on the Zamboni a little.
There you go.
I love it. Okay.
Where in the
So,
solar system could we go to get skating um, like Earth, that's but not Earth? Ooh,
well, okay, so what
where
about
could
Europa?
well, yeah, so I think it has the same
Perhaps.
problems, right, John? Same problems?
Yeah, a lot of the same issues
Yeah.
going on there,
Hmm.
surface not being flat, but there's a few places where there are natural processes that try to flatten things out. So
Mm.
the seasonal cap of carbon dioxide on Mars could work. And then there's
Ooh.
Triton. It has a solid state greenhouse effect. It's a little closer to the sun than Pluto. Again, nitrogen ice, but closer to the melting point. So, there might be some possibilities there.
That is fascinating. Okay.
I have more
Um,
questions, but we should move on.
yeah, let us move on. This is sort of similarly fun. In your description of the voyages, it's not just about what the Voyagers' physical senses are experiencing. You also take the time to kind of internalize the experience, and you talk about the Voyagers' emotional reactions. Sometimes it's excitement or panic or disorientation or a loss of sense of time. A transformational change of perspective is a common one, that sort of thing. And so I'm wondering, as you thought so deeply about what each experience would feel like, if you could choose any one of the adventures in the book to go on, which would it be and why?
Ooh.
What do you start, Jesse?
Oh my gosh.
You get to pick between the children.
Oh, I feel like my answer has changed over the last year or two. So the Hyperion chapter is close to my heart. I did a little more of the story on that one. Um, so most of the stories are written by John, and the other half of the chapter is sort of semi-written by me. So like
Hmm.
the Hyperion one, I tried to actually try and write a story myself because John's just so good
Mhm.
at it, and I was just trying to emulate John. And I've always been a rock climber at heart, and I've always liked caves, and I really wanted to write this one about Hyperion and have
Okay.
someone digging down or crawling through all these things that terrifies me. So like
Me
I
too.
I don't know if you've ever like read stories about spelunkers or watched videos of spelunkers going through these really narrow
I
pinches, right?
couldn't even watch that.
Right, same. So like I'll watch it and my palms will get sweaty, right?
Yeah.
And um there was a movie about that young soccer team. I forget where it was in the world. There is a soccer team that got stuck in a cave. Do you remember this one? And they got
Yes.
yeah. And so I had just watched that movie and I really wanted to do this. So I think imagining what the internal structure of Hyperion looks like
Hmm.
and the possibility that it could have caverns the size of a city inside it
Oh, wow.
is quite tantalizing. And so I think it
Yeah.
would be really fun to try and go and like push my boundaries and go into these caverns if they exist and see that.
Oh, that's so like Lord of the Rings. That is awesome. John, what about you?
Well, if there's anywhere that I could go, I always enjoyed the Venus chapter, the one in the upper atmosphere with the
Hmm.
balloon festival. And you can
Ah.
probably tell I enjoyed that one because I think I went a little overboard in terms of how long that chapter is. I just enjoyed, thinking about the future, thinking about the anachronism of taking a hot air balloon into the Venusian atmosphere.
Hmm.
It's still just all the exotic sights that you'd see, the sunset, all of those balloons lit up, at night as you go around Venus in 80 hours.
Right.
That one I found, if I could go anywhere, I think that would be a fun place to go and experience something. Although you had mentioned the emotion here, we did pick a couple of stories to give a little bit of a darker tone to.
Uh-huh.
And we did that with some of the smaller bodies. So the asteroid chapter, the comet chapter, those
Hmm.
are very different in tone from the rest. When we started out, we thought, well, we can't have every chapter be like, hooray, I'm on the surface of another
Right.
planet doing something exciting.
Yeah.
You want
Yeah.
to meet with all the colors that you have.
Interesting.
And there's a
From
natural like introspection that comes. I think whenever you watch movies like science fiction movies, space always whenever you have space scenes, I find you always end up with these scenes where the main characters or the protagonists or the antagonists are sitting in these dark voids of space. Like the void of space
right.
creates that like sort of like introspection, which can be good or bad. It can be happy or sad. And so leaning into that, I think, is what happened there.
Hmm. For me, it would be the skydiving on Jupiter.
Mhm.
I am addicted to big, big sight lines, like born and raised in downtown Toronto, where, it's very claustrophobic. And you did that chapter was written so amazingly, like the way that you try to capture what it must feel like to have these endless, endless sight lines. Anyway, I'm going to say more about that one later. Um,
Was that the first one, John? Was that the first chapter you wrote?
No, the first one that we wrote was the chapter of just sitting back on Mars and looking up at the clouds. There are some really quiet chapters as well, to people.
mhm.
And I'm kind of curious, since you mentioned Jupiter, Robin, um, how did you like the spaces between the clouds?
This, um, I don't like the spaces between the clouds. Do you mean like oh, I see what you mean. In the moments where you can't see anything, because is that what you're talking about?
Well, it
Like,
just that's what always kind of struck me. Like you're talking about those sight lines, right, above the
right.
cloud.
So you go through layers, and
Mm.
at some point you can't see anything at all, right?
No, no, but you know that there's this big, vast interior empty space.
Ah, yeah, yeah, it was my favorite part about it was when we're falling past the great red spot,
Mm.
and you do get a sense of just how crazy big that thing is as you're falling past it. Yeah, I like that. It seemed to me that that was a very challenging chapter to write, to try to explain these sight lines that are so unfathomable to us. And but it was done really, really well. I loved it. We're just at the halfway mark, so I do have to do a little halfway announcement, which is that this is a reminder to our listeners that we are broadcasting live from the Allan I. Carswell Observatory, located at York University in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, home of the largest telescope at a Canadian university. And this podcast of York Universe, as well as past episodes, are available wherever podcasts are distributed. You can connect with us from our website at www.yorku.ca/science/observatory, or by our Instagram and X handle at York Observatory, or on Facebook at Allan I. Carswell Observatory. Okay, let's switch threads slightly, but I will get back to some of these things that we've just started talking about. I'd like to talk about the process and methods of your collaboration. And this was very much a team effort, and that can be an extremely rewarding experience, but also with its pain points sometimes. And I'm especially interested in this process owing to another collaborative project that I learned about recently. I just wanted to share it with you. I think Michelle will appreciate this especially. So I recently attended a talk by an artist, and she described a project she worked on with another artist during the pandemic. So during this time, one artist lived in Toronto and the other lived in Brooklyn. They'd never met in person, but they'd connected online through friends of friends, and they discussed the idea of producing a collaborative painting together. So when the pandemic hit and we were all confined to our homes, they came up with the idea of purchasing a single sketchbook and mailing it back and forth to each other. And each time the sketchbook was received, one of them would add a few paintings, and then they would end with a painting that was half completed for the other artist to complete in their own style. And at this talk, we saw photographs of the pages in the sketchbook. And what was so remarkable is that these two artists had totally different painting styles. One was into like vibrant, colorful nature scenes, and the other was more abstract, but far more detailed, and just like filling the page with meticulously drawn patterns and complicated surfaces. And yet, on the pages that were painted together, the merging of these two totally different styles, it was absolutely seamless. Like you would never guess that they were done by multiple artists. And the result was beautiful, like these very original and interesting paintings. The artist had also prepared a video of moments when they received each other's packages in the mail, and the video captured their thoughts and feelings as they looked at each other's work and how the other artist had completed their half of the combined painting. And they also talked about how they'd feel some anxiety when they looked at the last page with the latest half-finished painting, and they would think, this is so beautiful. I don't want to ruin it and disappoint my partner, which of course they never did. But in any case, I would love to hear about your collaborative process and like what did you do on your own? What did you do when you came together? And also, as you heard that story, if it brought to mind any similar moments of what it felt like when you came together to combine your different contributions.
Well, Jesse, do you want to talk about the the real story about how this worked, or?
Yes. What's the real story?
Well, I think we had this conversation, Jesse and I, in 2019. I was on sabbatical, Jesse was at the Ingenium, and we sort of came out of the conversation and walk around the museum thinking, okay, let's do this thing. And
Mhm.
then 2020 happened, and things sort of went on the back burner for a little bit. And when we resurfaced later in 2020, we started setting up weekly meetings, Jesse and I, ostensibly to talk about the book, but I don't know, did we actually get to the book, until like we were 90% the way through any of those
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot of the time we were just like chatting and discussing and learning and
Mhm.
having fun. Yeah.
So it was really a way for us to, stay connected to one another, I think. And
Right.
sort of, it's nice when you have a friend to have a thing, right?
Yeah.
we
It's
would
like the
work
excuse.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And so you could go away and do a little bit of work on your own, and then you could bring that back together and we could talk about it again. And so we sort of continued this process as we worked on sort of the more businessy side of things.
Ah.
Yep. Michelle came along fairly early in the process to, offer some art, and we just really loved that watercolor style.
Hmm.
That softness really helped.
Yes. Y-
And
Yeah,
so
it works perfectly for this. Um, was there ever a moment when you wanted to fire each other?
Well, I can speak to that, and that would probably be them wanting to fire me. So um,
Jesse.
John and Michelle are incredible. I have
Mhm.
nothing but respect, and you guys like your work ethic and how smart you are and how good you are at what you do. I could not be luckier to be collaborating, and I definitely um, I tried to keep up, and I had there was lots going on, and I definitely wanted I think I wanted to contribute harder. If I could go back, I would have contributed harder. Um, but so for me, I couldn't be luckier. I'm sure that the two of them were like, "Oh, Jesse, come on, man!" Like
Come
at
on.
some point. No, like to their credit, they were ne they I would say this was probably the best collaboration I've ever had. I never
Oh,
once, from my perspective, never once was mad or worried or scared. And John, whenever I was coming up short, John was so welcoming and great about it. John, your students must, are lucky to have you as a supervisor. I'll tell you that. So from me, yeah, like and I'm sure John, from you guys, even if I was a little slow, it from my perspective, it worked really, really well. It was really
mhm.
convivial and fun and good, just a good time.
Well, we enjoyed it quite a bit as well. And, thanks for the nice comments about my students. So the other, I think from my perspective, one interesting thing was where you had a lot of the science sides of things. I could see you because we had access to each other's writing. Like we were actually writing online, and we could watch the other person, write if we wanted to, as
Okay.
creepy as that might be.
Hmm.
There's times there
Just watching me
where,
as I create.
I could see, yeah, I could see Jesse making, nice, steady process,
Hmm.
progress, with the science explanation of things. And me, I'm just sitting here at a blank page, waiting for inspiration to strike.
Right.
And when it did, it went fast.
Hmm.
A lot of times when, it wasn't really clear what the next move was, or, how to start the next story. The hardest one, I think, was the comet. And
Hmm.
I didn't get unblocked with that one until after Michelle and I talked about the art on it. That one we had been looking at art separately, art of shipwrecks, and we were having a conversation, and it came to me that the comet needs to be a shipwreck. So we definitely had places where the art inspired the story,
Right.
where the story inspired the science, where the science inspired the art or the story. So we've had all the different combinations between the three of us.
Oh, that's so cool. That was my next thing was to ask Michelle a couple of questions about her process. Um, Michelle, you're so the book includes your watercolor illustrations that they visualize some of the most surreal experiences in the book, and you do this so well, particularly with your choice of colors. It's almost as though you've created a palette of like alien paint, like the specific hues that you use for sky and clouds and surfaces. They're so clearly otherworldly, and it makes each painting so interesting to look at. So I was going to ask about how your creative process worked. Like, did you read each chapter and just let your imagination and your paintbrush have its way? Or were you asked to illustrate specific aspects of each voyage? It sounds like, as John was just saying, it was a mixture of all that.
Yeah, definitely a mixture of all that. I came in kind of later in the process when the book was most chapters had a draft. So I was kind of reading them as they were happening. Well, some were
Mhm.
already written and some were, underway. Um, and what I would do is just read it, get a gist of what the chapter was about, and then I would draft some small little sketches for Jesse and John to look at. And usually I had like 8 to 10 little sketches for each chapter, and they would just pick what
Ah,
idea resonated the best,
okay.
like that worked the best, and then I would translate that into a small painting. Oftentimes a small painting was good enough. It hit the mark and it was like appropriate for the book and we were all satisfied with it. Sometimes I wasn't satisfied and I would make a bigger version of the painting.
Hmm.
I'd say probably about half of them have more than one iteration, I think.
Hmm. And it
Um,
sounds like sometimes the painting drove the story.
yeah, in a couple of cases for sure.
That's
Hmm.
great. I love
And
that.
where are these amazing original watercolors now? What have you done with them all?
They're sitting, well, some of them are framed, and when we do local talks, I will bring them along.
Okay.
Most of them are sitting in storage in my
Okay.
like art drawer with all of my other art.
Right. Oh, that's such an awesome addition to, when you go and you talk about the book to have the paintings there. Like, what do you think you'll do with them all one day?
I will sell them eventually. I think
Okay.
I'll wait and see what happens, in the future with the book
Hmm. Very
and
cool.
other things. Yeah, but for now, I'm hanging on to them.
Okay. Um, okay. I wanted to go back to talking about just the writing of the book.
Well, can I
Whereas
jump in? Sorry, Robin.
oh,
One
sure, yeah.
just on that, just while you're talking about the beautiful watercolors, Michelle also, maybe you're going to bring this up soon, but Michelle also had one or two like sci-comp like visualizations as part of the chapter for like graphs and charts and stuff that
Ah,
she made.
uh-huh.
And I worked a lot with her on those, and I found what just to sort of compound what we were saying, I found that I'd be like the one that sticks out of my brain is the orbits of the moons of Jupiter, and trying to sit down and explain why one orbit is this long and then the next one is 2 times that, next one's 3 times that, and like they're all synchronized, and you have this whole explanation, and then you have someone come in and like give you a nice visualization for that. What I ended up doing a bunch of times with those is like go back and rewrite how I was doing the science communication of it all,
Right.
because of the image that was being created. It's like what I wish I could be doing for my lectures, right?
Right.
To have like a person who knows how to make visualizations help me deliver the content. So it was
Oh,
really rewarding and
I
sort of,
so often wish the same thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay, so I started our conversation by commenting on how well written the book is. Like you really have an exceptional talent for crafting evocative sentences, particularly with your use of analogies. And as a reader, you know when an author has done this absolutely perfectly, like has made you see and feel what you would feel in that moment because it gives you the chills, right? So here's just one of many examples. This is from the chapter on surfing Saturn's rings. When we traverse to the shadow of the rings, where only a bit of sunlight gets through the ring particles, and you just describe it like this: lying beneath a leafy tree, here sparkles from the sun make their way to your eyes from time to time, but more often you are drawn to the pattern of light and darkness that dapple you in your surfboard. The patterns reel and change as the ring particles move in their slow dance, sometimes blocking the sun, other times revealing it. I'm positive that as I read that just now, listeners were easily evoking that view of sitting under a tree and watching the moving patterns of sunlight on the ground, and then just as easily replacing the leaves with ring particles and the ground with a surfboard. And I just thought that analogy was so perfectly chosen to help us experience this totally alien moment. So the quality of the writing, in my opinion, this is only possible by humans who are avid readers, which I think you both are. And so I'd love to know if you have any favorite science fiction books that you would recommend, or what you're reading right now.
Well, I have to talk John. I don't know if John will talk himself up, but I have to talk John up more,
Okay.
um, because what you're reading is John's words, and every single story is like that. And
Yes.
every single one, when I'm reading, because I read them obviously, and I read through them, and you know, you're just like, as you're reading them, you're like blown away by it. It's so beautiful.
It is beautiful.
So many analogies and so much science, John. There's so much science written into every story that you write.
Yes. Yes.
It's and I would be sitting there picking him like, John, I can't talk about all of this science. Like that was anyway. John, maybe I'll pass it to you to talk about your
I just,
reading.
yeah. John, are you an avid reader?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
And you're right to pick up on the analogies because that is really what drives these stories forward, is imagining what it might be like in, if I'm doing the writing my own life, and going back into my own memories and placing myself there and trying to imagine what it felt like, and what appealed to my senses and how it made me feel. So that's, I can tell you exactly, the memory that I draw on, with that particular ring thing.
Hmm.
In terms of, what I'm reading and what I've read. So I know Jesse and I talked about this a little bit. I've read a lot of science fiction, and when I got hired by York back in 2012, I knew I was going to have a bit of a commute, and an hour in the morning, hour in the afternoon on the TTC. And I decided, you know what? Why don't I put this to good use? And where some people might be doing email or grading papers or reading, you know, those research papers, that we
Hmm.
all ought to be doing. Um, I read science fiction. I decided, you know what? I'm going to pick a big project that's going to take me a long time to finish. I'm
Hmm.
going to read all of the Hugo Award winners, the Nebula Award winners, the Locus Award winners. I'm going to start right at the beginning, and
Hmm.
I'm going to go right to the end. And, we'll see. Maybe, my career will be over first. Yeah, I think I was done after like 5 or 6 years.
Really, that's an amazing project. So science fiction is your favorite, or do you like other genres?
Anything speculative is fun. I mean, in
Okay.
terms of what I'm reading right now, I'm reading Space Oddity by Catherine Valente.
Ah, interesting. I personally love historical science fiction, and I just finished a book called The Ministry of Time. Have you read this? Anyone? Does that
Oh,
sound
No,
familiar?
not me.
No.
No.
Oh,
sounds
highly,
so familiar.
highly recommended. Again, like beautiful writing, and it is such an interesting story. Um, well, maybe offline I'll tell you about it, but pick it up and take a look. It's like a page turner, but absolutely beautiful and very, very original.
I can tell
Um,
you, so
yeah.
I'm not nearly as avid a science fiction reader as John, but I do dabble and I do enjoy. It's my favorite type of book to read, I would say.
Hmm.
When I do read, the Mars trilogy is
Oh, yes.
by far the most influential group of books I've ever read for me.
Mm.
Um, I read the first one, and I remember speaking of like evoking the emotions, like at the end of that book being sad, not because
Mm.
the book was so good that I was sad I didn't have more to read, and I'm sure many of
Yeah.
you have felt that before, right?
Yeah.
So I I I just absolutely love everything about those books. And I think that John, and I know John likes them as well. And some of the things we grappled with made it in our book. I think we're sort of influenced by some of what Kim Stanley Robinson grappled with the Mars trilogy.
Interesting.
Um,
And if I could interject here just for a second,
yeah,
3 of the chapters are actually homages to different work out.
Hmm.
So we've got, for Kim Stanley Robinson, there's The Repelling on Mars. He has a short story, or really a novella, called Green Mars, separate from his book Green Mars, which is about climbing Olympus Mons. So
Hmm.
he sped it up by going down. And then we also have the asteroid chapter, which is a nod to The Little Prince,
Hmm.
and that skydiving in Jupiter's atmosphere. That one, what got me thinking about that one was, Dan Simmons and his Hyperion Quartet.
Ah, interesting. The chapter on the asteroid chapter, gardening on Bennu, that was one of my favorites as well. I wanted to talk much more about that one, but we're so short on time. So I'll probably just time for one more question. This is one of my very favorite questions to ask when I'm out at a bar, or I often use it as an icebreaker on the first day of one of my classes. Would you go to space? So just start with this. Would you volunteer to be the first human explorers of Mars? Like, are you that kind of people?
Yes. So okay, I would have said yes, and I am definitely that kind of person. The only reason I would not go now is because I have kids,
Ah,
and I
so,
would
but
feel
before you would have done that, you would have been the first.
hell yeah. Yeah.
Wow, John,
This is actually the second time I've had to answer this question today on air.
are you serious?
Yes, yes, I got
Okay.
asked it during Here and Now on CBC this afternoon.
Okay, what did you say?
And my answer is no. You know,
Okay.
and to that, I point out, see the previously being concerned about dying.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah, I
okay,
can't
but
really enjoy it, right?
so all right, so but where does your like would you go to space period?
To tell you the truth, Robin, I don't love roller coasters or flying, so
Okay.
space might be a bit much for me.
Okay. I'm the same. I don't have any interest in even just going, into orbit or something like that. But I would love to see a rocket launch, which I haven't seen yet.
Well,
Hoping
we'll
to
have to
soon.
send Jesse as our representative then.
I can't believe, Jesse, you would actually go and be among the first. That is so cool.
Yeah, I mean, I I don't do it as much as I want to, but I love exploring. I love traveling. I love climbing mountains, and I don't do any of this as
But
much
but
as
this is at a totally different level. Okay.
I don't know. I just love it. I love the idea of it.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
It always surprises me when I ask that question to my students, and there is always some fraction of students that would be the first, with like the chances of them coming back pretty slim. So it's amazing. Um, okay, I can see that we're really close on the end here. What next for you all? Do you have other creative projects in mind?
Yeah, there's things yeah, things that I at least I'm sort of semi thinking about, and John, what about you?
Yeah, there's another book that I've started work on, which is totally different topic, still, sort of planetary science, but more conventional science writing, I think. This particular book was a lot of fun. Um, but I think it was challenging for us to find people who really got what we were trying to do, Jesse. I felt when we were talking with publishers.
Yeah.
So,
Really, that shocks me.
well, is it fiction? Is it nonfiction, right? How do you sell something like this? That's the
Hmm.
tough question. And we're first-time authors, so any press is going to need to take a chance on us. And we're so delighted that MITP did.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I'm going on sabbatical again. I'm going to try something, a little bit more conventional and see how that goes. But, we might be back to this particular way of writing at some point in the future.
Hmm. I'm quite surprised by that because it's there aren't I think one of you talk about this at the beginning that especially in Nats and the type of we teach science for engagement, that it is very difficult to find these really engaging ways to communicate science. So yeah, I'm surprised that that was a tough sell, but whatever. The end result was amazing. Um,
Thank you. Thank you so much.
yeah, oh, I just loved it. Really, really loved it. So, very sadly, that does conclude our show for this evening. And any last thoughts any of you want to say about the book and to each other or potential readers of it?
Well, that's a good question. I hope anyone enjoys it. Thank you, John and Michelle, for letting me work with you. And if anybody ever wants to chat about it, hit me up on social media. I'll talk about it.
Awesome.
Absolutely agreed. And great working with you as well, Jesse, and with Michelle.
Mhm.
I look forward to doing it again at some point in the future.
Should we inform people where to get the book if they want a copy?
Oh,
That's a very good point. It will be in the show notes, but go ahead, Michelle.
So you can get it from my website, michelleparsonsart.com. You can pick it up if you happen to see Jesse or John out in the wild giving a presentation about it. Usually I'm there selling books alongside them. You can get it from Amazon if that's your thing. And there's local bookstores around Toronto that carry it.
Very
Oh,
cool.
and the York University Bookstore has copies sometimes.
Keep selling out.
Yeah.
Very cool. Thank you so much
flying
for
off the
that.
shelves there.
Is it really?
I don't know.
I'm sure it is. Well, John, Jesse, Michelle, I can't thank you enough for sharing your time with us. That was super fun. I could have easily done this for another hour. But it is time to wish our listeners good night with the usual York Universe send-off. You have been listening to York Universe, the astronomy and astrophysics program written and presented by the students, faculty, alumni, and friends of York University. We have been broadcasting to you live from the Allan Carswell Observatory located at York University in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I'm Robin Metcalf. I've been your host for this evening's podcast. And this podcast, as well as past episodes, are available wherever podcasts are distributed. If you have any questions or comments about anything you've heard on tonight's podcast, or if you'd like to learn more about upcoming observatory events, or if you'd like to request a topic of your choice for one of our future shows, you can connect with us from our website at www.yorku.ca/science/observatory, or by our Instagram or X handle, Yorku Observatory, or on Facebook at Allan Carswell Observatory. Thank you all so much for tuning in to York Universe, and we wish you all clear skies and dreams that are out of this world.